But there is this possibility of waking up to a transcendent reality that can't be packaged, can't be quantified, can't be bought or sold. This is the whole story of Jesus in the temple, you know? That was Jesus railing against spiritual materialism when he yelled out, "This is my Father's house," which is, you know, a rejection of people trying to package this shit.
Caw-caw! That's the sound of below the line getting started, at least today's, because I've never made that sound before. And if I have made that sound on an episode before, I would love proof. So onus is on you. Today's episode is with one of the funniest human beings on the planet, Duncan Trussell. He also has one of the best podcasts on the planet, Duncan Trussell Family Hour, one of the best shows on Netflix, The Midnight Gospel, and also has a book that he's publishing, and it's just a creator to the nth degree, and brilliant creator at that, but all in the background of almost everything he does, there's this very strong spiritual, philosophical side to him, and that's the side that we get to explore and talk about today in depth. I wanted to get to his career as a comedian and touch more on that in theory, but I found it so fascinating to talk about his philosophical views, his spiritual views on life, and we ended up just going down different rabbit holes and the way he perceives the world and life itself. It's a phenomenal conversation. One of my favorite conversations I've ever had in my life. So I think you will enjoy it. So if you dig these types of conversations with creators right at the intersection of creation, philosophy, psychology, then hit the subscribe button, tap that bell thing on YouTube, give it 5 stars to pump it up. Well, only if it deserves it. I think it helps with algorithms, but I'm not exactly sure. Do all those things. Enough of all that. Without further delay, let's get into it with Duncan Trussell. This is Below the Line. DT Suzuki on the podcast.
Hi.
How's your day going?
Great. Really good. Thanks for asking. Very productive day.
Oh, excellent.
I interviewed Wim Hof.
Oh, killer. Man, I'd love a little carbon copy of the conversation you just had with him. Any strange insights?
Well, I mean, if you know anything about him, then I guess you kind of know what to expect, but it was really cool. I mean, I think everyone just knows he's like brilliant, and he's like so full of energy. You know, he's like a living example of how this thing that he discovered clearly works. You know, it's very exciting to be around. He's contagious. He's got like this infectious good energy.
Yeah, he I know in the 80s he read a lot of the Upanishads and created his own form of yoga, apparently. It's pretty.
Yeah, right. Like when he was 12, he was saying that he got into all the stuff, Buddhism, wow. You know, all the stuff. And then, yeah, but it was just interesting the way it wasn't like he was deflecting that stuff informed his breathing method or anything, but he was saying that it came to him just from getting in cold water. Like he started noticing the way he was breathing when he got in cold water and realized that if he did it out of cold water, it was having these really intense effects on him. And the whole theory behind it is that it is like when you get into cold water, your adrenal glands are like going nuts because your body recognizes
freaking out.
Cold water can kill you from hypothermia. So it's like almost like a safe way to make your body think it's in danger. And then from that, it wakes you up and gives you all the like good chemicals that your brain naturally produces. And so I think his breathing method does the same thing. I haven't gotten too into it, but I'm fascinated. I love taking cold showers. It's the best.
Really? When did you start doing
that? I
that?
like the after effect. on and off all the time ever since I started reading his stuff. And then, he created this whole, I think he's the reason that all these cold dips are everywhere all of a sudden. And people are ordering these things, ice baths, and laying in them, even though it was used to treat mental illness, I think.
There's so many of these things that end up becoming, I just read this morning that intermittent fasting doesn't seem to have any, after a year-long study with, I think, 1,000 participants, didn't show any benefits across anything. I think you see these fads that then don't have the research to back it up, but the cold therapy seems to have the research that backs it up, and that's the other cool thing about him is he just kept referring to all of these studies that they've done, and he lets himself be a lab rat. I think he let them inject him with some kind of toxin to show that his immune system was working in a way that was different from other people who weren't using his technique, which is wild to imagine, letting people inject you with poison to show that whatever you're doing works. That's really cool. Definitely putting your money where your mouth is. Yeah. By the way, how's the fam? How's Aaron? How's Forrest?
Thank you for asking. Great. We're all doing really good. Yeah, we're doing great.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, so we're going to go deep into your personal and professional career side of things, and just how the hell do you even today on a Thursday manage your psychology? How have you learned to manage your psychology as a creator, podcaster, comedian, amazing show on Netflix, all of these different creations, probably many more creations. I think you just had a community written book that you put out.
Yes, that goes out next week. We finally got everything, all the business stuff taken care of with that. I mean, we're giving all the proceeds away, but just to get to that point, there's a lot of releases people have to sign and stuff. So we finally got through that.
Well, just a creator across the entire spectrum of creating things, how you manage it today, how you managed it poorly or well early on. And then I also, I know that it will be inevitable. We also get to the spiritual side of things. That is such a, that's where my wife and I, Cheney and I, we can't get enough of Duncan Trussell's musings. And like I said at the top of the conversation, these woven thoughts that I've just never heard anyone put together. So
that's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Well, it is true. So I want listeners to get a taste of that as well. And, but going back to the personal, professional side of things, could you walk listeners and myself through, did you feel like an idiot back? Just walk me through the whole process of.
I always feel like an idiot. I mean, how do you not feel like an idiot? You should feel like you. I think there's a dangerous thing that could happen to people, and it's particularly dangerous as a comedian, which is if you're not careful, this kind of really horrific seriousness can creep into you, and suddenly you go from being a comedian to being some kind of politician or some kind of I don't know what, you know what I mean? It's really important to remember. I mean, I hate the stay in your lane people, and it's no one else's job to tell you. It's not your job to tell people to stay in their lane. And obviously it's not anyone's job to tell you that, but I have to always, I think one of the qualities of being a comedian is if you're not careful, you will embarrass yourself by forgetting your primary job is hopefully making people laugh. Then the next thing you know, you're spouting some political bullshit, or you're trying to say, you're trying to save the world, or you're doing it, which is generally only a fool would do that. So I have to be very careful, because otherwise that can happen where and then all of a sudden I'm all crusty and shit when I'm trying to record a intro for the podcast. It's it's all sanctimonious and embarrassing, and I'm listening to what's wrong with you? You're not Alan Watts. What are you doing? You're not some sophisticated British academic. Why are you trying? So I have to be careful, because otherwise.
But you really can be. Honestly, if there's a human with a microphone that has a chance to become that I know of, it would be Duncan Trussell.
Well, I got the alcoholic part of it down. That's the easiest part of being Alan Watts. The rest of it, I'm not really quite sure. But I understand what you're saying. It's just, I think it's one of the fun things about being in the moment, really being in the moment, is and especially like in podcasting, which is to me that's my favorite way of doing a podcast. Is sort of like if I'm going into a podcast with an agenda, I try to wipe that away so that you're just in the moment, and so to accomplish that, I think it requires sort of disowning any whatever idea that you've arrived at regarding where you are as a person, where you are spiritually, because you're not anywhere. It's and so I love Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche so much because there's this continual invitation to disown everything that happened before this, so any of the secret mental spiritual medals, awards, trophies that you've given yourself, or maybe you've taken them away from yourself or wherever, whatever, the invitation is, well, it doesn't really matter because that's all gone. Now there's just this. And initially when I came into contact with that sort of thing, it made me angry because my ego, the human ego wants to like own something. And it's the paradox when it comes to spirituality is like, it's really not much of anything. Like, what are you going to hold on to? What are you owning? What, that you went to like 90 fucking ayahuasca retreats, or, that you've like memorized the Bible, or that you could read Sanskrit or whatever the thing is. Who cares? Really? It doesn't really matter.
In the startup realm, that is the whole point of like, oh, put 10 years, any type of arrangement where it's like the ends will justify the means. So you sacrifice, you put in 3 years, 5 years, you went 2 years without a salary. Like that's all people tend to stand upon instead of this moment or this interaction with a customer. It's just, this has been years leading up to this, and I deserve the result from this sale that I hope to make.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And that's such a painful way to be. And it hurts. I mean, I hate it. That's terrible. It's so, there is something really exciting about just disowning all of it and all the retreats, whatever you did. This is one of the coolest. There's a say in stand-up comedy, people will say, you're only as good as your last set. So, I think that's true. Like every time you get on stage, it's a completely different crowd. It's always different. So this is a very frustrating for people if you're trying to find some kind of ground that that's constant and steady and singular that you can stand on. And that's where you get that sort of disease of like, I deserve this. My whole life has gone to worked up to this point. All this dramatic bullshit. This is in Buddhism. There is this, oh God, it's called mind training, Lo Zhong. It's all these sort of mnemonic devices that you can use to remind you to get yourself back in the moment. Like when it comes to meditation or interacting with reality or whatever. My favorite one is abandon all hopes of fruition. This is the best advice ever. And I like it not just because if you do that, then suddenly your agenda goes out the window. And so you're not dragged down by that because you're like, yeah, it's not going to work. I'm not going to get enlightened. Nothing's going to come of this. Literally nothing. This is nothing. And then the other thing I like about it is it's in Dante's Inferno. What's written on the gates of hell? Do you remember?
No.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And if you, at first that sounds sinister, but you realize, oh my God, that's the most compassionate thing that you could say to people in hell. Because how much of the suffering in hell is caused by some idea that it's going to end at some point, you know, and it never does. So if you abandon all hope, maybe hell won't be quite as rotten. Not to say that what we're in right now is hell, but, you know, I think that there's certain forms of hope that aren't very beneficial. You know, obviously some hope is really important and good, and you don't want to walk, like the term hopeless is generally used in the pejorative, right? You're a hopeless case, or I feel hopeless. So yeah, we need some kind of hope. I get it. But then there's another kind of hope that's just delusion and ignorance.
Hopium.
And that's the kind of hope. That's what they call it now. Yeah, that's what they call it now. It's trying to put lipstick. It's trying to put lipstick on a pig. You know, it's still a pig. So anyway, yeah, abandon all hope of fruition when it comes to meditation. And, you know, and I think when it comes to a business, probably, I would guess that if you're too invested in where you think things are going to go or what your life is going to look like after you achieve the thing that you're working so hard to get to, then you really might miss all the little moments that you need to be fully present for, probably to get you there, right? I would think.
Well, in the vein of losing the agenda and just connecting with this current moment in front of us, I thought we'd start with your personal professional career and that chronology and that story, and then get to the gooey center, which is the philosophical side of Duncan Trussell. But let's actually just stay here and lose that. Maybe we'll get to that later in the conversation. One of the things that I thought about texting you recently, like yesterday, was about kind of like basically hack or not. And I'm going to give you a couple names, and then you tell me, not in a super judgmental way, but just in your unfolding of going deeper and deeper into philosophy, going deeper and deeper into Buddhism, into Eastern spirituality. Alan Watts, hack or not?
I'm not calling anyone a hack.
Okay.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not doing that game.
Okay.
That's
all right.
I don't, because here's the thing. This is something when I was younger, you know, I would make those kinds of judgments and stuff. But when the older you get and the longer you're in the business or whatever you want to call it, for me at least, the more I get to the point where anyone who's like doing it, as far as I'm concerned, holy shit, that's incredible. And some like spiritual teachers, I don't connect to at all. I find them to be, from my own perspective, like, Jesus, why would anyone be interested in that? But I think there's different teachers for different types of people, and different comedians for different types of people, obviously different musicians for different types of people. And one of the early phase things that we do is to entertain the notion of like a hack, right? You really have to like imagine you're kind of omniscient or something. Like, I mean, we're talking about unquantifiable aspects. Like there are some spiritual people that really just seem like business people. There's some comedians that, you know, they're like business people.
Really?
They figured out a cadence and a method and a way of delivering comedy that is, you know, maybe you wouldn't, when you look at it, you would think that's exactly the rhythm or something that I hear over and over again or whatever. And then if you're, you know, in the early, that's why like comedians in the beginning, I think, are quite often way more judgmental than comedians later on, you know, because you just sort of realize the whole damn thing's a process. That's the problem with the hack assessment. Yeah, maybe right now they are, maybe right now they suck, but you're looking at a thing in process that's evolving, you know? So yeah, I like, Alan Watts was brilliant though. I mean,
Yeah.
I disagree with some of the shit he said, but good Lord, what a mind, what an incredible ability he had to be entertaining while sort of, and also to be mind blowing and to like, his ability to articulate those ideas in a way with all these awesome left hooks, lure you in and blow your mind and repeat. It was fucking cool. And I love that he called himself a spiritual entertainer, because he was trying to not like get the guru disease.
What is the guru disease?
Well, the guru disease afflicts people who want power. So you end up like, if you like, there's a terrible situation out there, which is that I think a lot of people have, like, they're looking for their mommy or their daddy or something like that. They want someone to save them, basically. Like they want anybody but themselves to save them. So, and also in the sort of lore or whatever, we always hear about this possibility. Yes. And it's, that you hear about, well, you'll find a guru one day or whatever. And so it gets in, it's like the whole looking for your soulmate thing, whatever. So you have this secret fantasy that at some point you're going to find the lady or the dude in the robe who's going to purify you, cleanse you, know everything about you, elevate you to the next level. And so in all of that madness, you open yourself up to being completely taken advantage of by people who've identified that trait and know how to like play into it and pretend to be that thing, and allow people to elevate them and centralize them. And because there's incredible amounts of money in it, especially if you're running a religious foundation, which doesn't pay taxes. So, what is it Mark Twain said? Religion is what started when the first con man met the first fool.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah. So like, I think I think it's easier to live in a world where you pretend there aren't predators out there. And so that opens you up to being prey and experiencing something that I think can, if you survive it, can be one of the greatest teachings ever, which is there's folks out there who are really good at pretending to be your savior. And look at all the maximum examples of that. You could see Jonestown, just piles of dead bodies, Waco, Heaven's Gate. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
There are prominent politicians that play right into that.
Yeah. So this is why, it's like kind of like it's not like everybody who becomes a guru is necessarily a predator or a sociopath or something like that. But sometimes just
they get the disease,
realizing and people are like want it. They want it. Like it's the dream.
The people around you maybe even want. I'm sure people really close to many of these leaders almost like want that leader to take on that role.
Yeah, exactly. There's something about it that's like, you could, if you don't like constantly, if you find yourself in any kind of teacher position, not just with spirituality, but with anything, if you don't really try to push people towards their own autonomy, to trust their own intuition, to believe in themselves, to understand that like we all are walking down the path together, then the next thing you know, you're in trouble because you're suddenly letting people like burn incense for you or some bullshit. And those people are not going to be happy when they find out you're not Jesus. They get pissed. Yeah. And they deserve to get pissed because you let them believe the stupid thing.
Yeah.
Guru disease.
That is to your point, that is the brilliance of Alan Watts saying things like, I am an entertainer, a philosophical entertainer, or, view me as someone that's up here playing Mozart. And, I have nothing to sell. I'm just here. And it was one of the, I think, brilliant moves of, so the reason I wanted to ask you that is because I think Alan Watts will go down as one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, if not the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. And yet you can get a couple, 5 years in, 6 years in, or if someone's hearing this for the first time and has no idea who Alan Watts is, can see shortcomings and see these imperfections, alcoholism being one of them, and say, okay, well, he didn't walk the talk, but his talk was always just, I'm an entertainer, and good Lord, did he walk that talk? He was, to your point, it was maybe one of the most erudite, articulate voices, especially with the melodic British accent that I've ever heard in my life. It is, and then tied with a really deep understanding of these concepts that were obviously so foreign to the West in the 50s, 60s. So I agree with you, but I've seen certain people just be like, no, especially really deep Buddhists. And I want to talk about your own spiritual path and what you're reading today. But people that go deep will say, oh, he's kind of like, I don't know, an elementary kind of figure, and not that deep, and not that serious about his spiritual practice. But I noticed that you and Joe Rogan never really mentioned Alan Watts. I wondered, has he ever heard of Alan Watts? Has he ever listened to him?
Oh yeah, I'm sure he has. Yeah, I think by now all of us have. I mean, there's so many like YouTube clips of Alan Watts giving one of his lectures. I'm sure he's heard of him. Yeah. I think that thing where people like it's watch out. If you hear someone like assessing someone is not deep enough or whatever, it's like, shut the fuck up. Oh, who are you? Or who are you? Who are you? Oh, great deep one. Mm-hmm. You know, like this. And that is one of the funniest things to me about the spiritual entertainment scene, especially back in the day when you had you had Alan Watts, you got Ram Dass, you got Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, you got Krishnamurti, you got all of these like kind of rock star spiritual teachers, and they were weirdly competitive, and that is so funny to me. Like, you can
tell listeners more. That's build that scene out for listeners that don't know those names and what you mean when you say rock. Because I'm totally following, but for listeners that might not have a sense, I mean, massive crowds were coming to see these guys.
Yes, they were selling tickets, man. They were moving tickets, and so, you know, they would get into these. You know, you can just look it up. I've seen a YouTube clip of like Chogyam Trungpa with Ram Dass, and like, you know, both of them are these like new age spiritual celebrities. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, I believe, as I recall, unless I missaw it, ashed his cigarette in Ram Dass's hair. You know what I mean? Or like you see Krishnamurti with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and Krishnamurti just wants to get in a fucking argument with Chogyam Trungpa, Chogyam Trungpa is just sitting there being quiet, and Krishnamurti is like laying into him, just trying to get him to, you know, get mad or act like anything other than what he was. But no matter what, you still recognize, oh, there's a really funny game of chess happening here that is really just a arm wrestling match. But because the arm wrestling match involves spiritual topics versus just like, hey, let me see if I'm stronger than you, it becomes absurd and hilarious. You know, that this was one of the interesting, I guess you could say, byproducts of people like Alan Watts and all of them coming to getting on stage and talking. You know, is this, I don't know. They were seemingly competitive.
What made that scene, if you're just to take a stab in the dark of why that scene arose in the 60s and 70s, where did it go? And And what does the scene look like today, if there is a quote unquote
Sure,
scene?
there's still spirituals. We got, let's see, who do we have right now?
Well, but
We've got,
why did it come out in
and-
the 60s and 70s? And where do you think it went? And then would love to hear what you think of today.
Okay, well, all right. So we have in the 60s, there was a culture, a travel culture that appeared. And so there was a kind of they were romanticizing the East. You know, this was a big part of hippie culture, you know, and so it's a really interesting like to look into like how yoga came to the West as we knew it, because you know there was a time when there were no yoga mats. You couldn't go to the Whole Foods and buy a fucking nice ass yoga mat. People were like using towels or just going on the floor, you know, and before it became a big industry, you know. So so what was happening is people were the tune in, turn on, drop out thing involved dropping out of society and going in caravans to India. Some of them would take buses from Europe and go through Afghanistan and go into India. And it wasn't just that, there was great hash over there too. And so this amazing, bizarre mixture of Western science in the form of LSD and Eastern mysticism were sort of meeting each other. And this was creating like a lot of big epiphanies for people. And so it's, you know, Ram Dass, Alpert being the classic, one of the other examples besides Alan Watts of somebody who was trained in Western systems, went to the East with LSD to give it to people to see what they thought of it, and then coming back to the West and like figuring out a way to articulate some of this stuff that, as you know, because you study the Upanishads, is not exactly accessible in its natural state. Especially, I mean, we're talking about a completely different symbol set over there, you know, completely different cultural experience, completely different everything. So being able to decode that and recode it in a way that people in the West and capitalism could understand at all was like amazing. And generally these are the people who became the spiritual superstars, it wasn't so much that they were innovating as much as translating, but that's what we needed.
Do you think, how big of a role did psychedelics play in this, whether receptivity for the authors themselves, speakers, or the receptivity of the audiences buying these tickets in droves?
Well, yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say at least initially, like a huge part, in the sense that LSD was, people were having these experiences on LSD that kind of flew in the face of all the conditioning that you're given if you grew up in the West, which is in the West, for example, death is hidden away. Like we have funeral homes, and we put makeup on dead people and put them in suits and put them in a box and drop them in the ground. But you try to like not talk about it, keep it hidden, you know. So, and people in the West have a different relationship with death, you know. Whereas in India, you're like, depending on where you're at, you're going to see dead bodies, man. Like if you go to Varanasi, you're going to it smells like barbecue, because they're just burning bodies there day and night, man. So it smells like a McDonald's, but it's not a McDonald's. That's not a Whopper you're smelling. That's a person being incinerated so the ashes could be dropped at the Ganges River. This is going to create a different relationship with death than what we have in the West. So I think people were taking LSD and experiencing ego death, or maybe they were taking mushrooms, or maybe even cannabis. Who knows? And so it was showing this way that it was showing a way that one's consciousness could be that was so incredibly new to the Western mind that it was confusing. And so maybe some of these Eastern ideas they needed that kind of fertile ground. I mean, maybe the psychedelics were sort of tilling the soil of the Western mind so that it could accept some of these ideas, and they could actually like find a place to grow. Because in the West, if you're, depending on what family you were born into, you're not born into a structure, a system where the idea of reincarnation or the idea of the reality of death or any of these things, it just it's easy to reject it and just get to work, This is all I'm just rambling now, but
no, but
I would say
honestly, I don't know very many people in the world to ask these questions to. So I don't know if there's I don't even think there is a domain expert that would have a researched opinion, but for someone to live at the intersection of many of these things and to care about observing how these things are coming together, it would be you. So I don't know who else I would pose that question to, of how big of an effect and part of the equation were psychedelics, with that kind of wave that happened with you personally. How big of an impact has psychedelics been in your own evolution and worldview?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm one of those people who really didn't have access to some of these concepts that I came upon later. So LSD was fundamental in helping me understand that how limiting, perception can be, and also how liberating it can be.
How so? What like for well, really for me, I've never done LSD, so I don't done ayahuasca, but I've never done LSD. Walk me through the specifics about that experience that makes you say it was liberating from how limiting.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you sort of, this is a really cheesy thing to say, and it's a classic hippie move. But if you're on LSD, you might find yourself looking at a dollar bill, for example, right? Just a dollar, the basic unit that is you've been using your whole life. And suddenly you're looking at it and you're like, what the fuck is this? What are all these symbols? Why do I think this means anything at all? This is nothing. This is just it's a rectangle of green paper that is like, I've invested so much power and the world has invested so much power in, but there's really nothing here at all. So for a kid in high school, suddenly understanding the way we project value onto symbols, but the symbol, it's just a symbol. It's not anything more than that. The value is coming from within us, and the dollar bill is acting like some kind of screen that we are all mutually agreeing has some value. And so that another way that it sort of helps you understand how limited your perception is when you're on LSD, is during the war on drugs, which I went through, which is, I think, ending or has ended mostly. And you're experiencing this incredible state of consciousness that is empowering and beautiful and healing. And that's just for me, by the way. Everyone should know that we all metabolize psychedelics differently, meaning that just because I'm proclaiming it was great for me, it does not mean it's going to be great for you. It could be the worst thing that ever happened to you. So I don't want to, I hope I'm not sounding as though I'm proselytizing for any kind of psychedelic. You have to find it on your own or something like that. And anyway, but to be in this state of consciousness and realize that you can go to jail for this, that they will put you in jail for a long time for this thing that is making you more connected to the earth, making you feel love for your family, making you happy to be alive, making you see nature for the first time, all these things that are just reconnecting you. And then you think, oh my God, why is this illegal? What kind of country, what kind of system would make this illegal. So then that
Wow.
opens up the reality of like, oh shit, the government, as I've come to understand it, is massively flawed. This isn't dangerous. This is less dangerous than alcohol. I did LSD before I drank. And I remember like drinking and getting drunk for the first time and thinking, what the fuck? This is the worst high. My body's all heavy. I feel sick. I can't talk very well. Why are people doing this? Being legitimately confused as to why anyone would do this to themselves when there was LSD.
My view on alcohol is that it's pure economics. It's like why we make everything with flour. It's because it was a way to keep the wheat and the grain for 6 months to 9 months. It was pure economics to keep the crop for a long time through the winter. You could still make things with it.
Right.
And so that was the reason that we not only created and stored flour, but put it in as many things as possible. It was not because like, wow, here's God's gift to the palate. Here's God's gift to the body. It was pure economics. I imagine something similar with alcohol because you can make it with anything that you can ferment. I mean, you can, rice, barley, grapes, but it's just so cheap. It's not so prevalent because it's the greatest chemical substance out there. It's because it's so damn cheap and you can make it anywhere around the world.
And let us not forget, it's like your only options. Like if you want to shift your consciousness, especially back then, I mean, if you live in California, now you have access to, legal cannabis or whatever states it's legal. But, back then, what you had was cigarettes, booze, maybe like if you want to be a real weirdo, cough syrup. You could get inhalants, and I'm trying to think. You could get in those days you could get like, what was it called, ephedra, before they made that illegal because people were turning it into meth. So like there was a very small list of substances to shift consciousness that you even had access to, which is why alcohol was so popular. I mean, if I had to bet, if we lived in a world where, psilocybin and LSD and nitrous oxide and all the other possible consciousness shifting drugs out there were on the shelf, that I don't think alcohol would be nearly as popular. I can't imagine it being nearly as possible. It would just seem like one of the options. But who's gonna pick Miller Lite when there's some kind of, psilocybin brew that's just the perfect milligram dosage of synthetic psilocybin to put you in a kind of euphoric joy state? Who's gonna be like, yeah, let's get beer when you could, that's because that's the other problem with the prohibition. Like in the West, we're very good at dialing in states of being high. We know just the amount of coffee that we can drink before we get the jitters. We know just the right amount of booze before we're a little tipsy. But because of the prohibition, we take like mushrooms and marijuana and other substances the way like frat boys drink. Because we don't know our dosages. We don't know what it even is. So people are constantly ODing themselves.
Right.
And
then they hate it. They swear it off forever. And they're like, I can't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll do and to exactly your point, once I never really smoked weed until it was legal here in California, and a 2 milligram gummy, maybe 4, which is on the very low. It's the lowest end that the cannabis store will really sell, a 2 milligram gummy. But one of those, maybe 2 of those, so much better over the last 5-6 years than even 2 beers. I used to, in my 20s, I used to say 2 beer buzz is the best buzz in the world. It's pretty shitty buzz actually compared to like a 2 or 4 milligram edible buzz for me. But it's and it's on the low end, but it's like in high school, I smoked too much. So I was like, no, man, weed's not for me. It gives me headaches. But to exactly what you're saying, I had no idea what the hell I was talking about.
You were ODing, and God knows what you were smoking. And, this is all side effects of the failed war on drugs. Is just, we're essentially like illiterate when it comes to consciousness altering substances. We just don't know. And yeah, so many people are like, I'll never eat marijuana because it makes me paranoid. It's like, yeah, well, that's because you're overdosing. You're ODing on it. You did the equivalent of like if you drink 3 bottles of wine.
And then alcohol and me don't agree with each other. Yeah.
I'll never drink again. I had 3 bottles of wine. I shit myself. I puked.
Alcohol makes me shit myself. No, ODing.
Yeah, exactly. You're ODing.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and this is again, I already said it, but we metabolize substances differently. So if you're really fucking up and you have a stoner friend and you like let them dose you, you're fucked, because like whatever they're taking is based on body weight, metabolism, tolerance, so you have to, at least my opinion here is like start small, incredibly small, microdose. And I think what we call microdosing now, it's a fashionable term, is just correct dosing. Like that's the right amount you should be taking it, just a light something. And then get to know it that way, and then work your way up.
That little ding is the sound of cold, hard, digital, invisible cash going right into your pocket. And by pocket, I mean your digital Shopify account that might be on your phone in your pocket. At least that's the case for us in Magic Mind. Shopify allows you to go from first sale to full scale, and it has for us. Magic Mind has 1 full-time employee, and we've gotten to 5 million in annualized sales using Shopify. Me, William, amazing GM, and Shopify. It is the no-brainer for any e-commerce stack that you've ever thought of. If you're selling online and you're running into issues left and right, Shopify is a solution. If you're thinking of selling online, it is the dream scenario of being able to get your first sale, scale to millions in sales. And we haven't done this yet, but when we do move into physical retail, when we move into physical shops, start building our own, you can actually go from online with Shopify to offline with Shopify, and everything is in beautiful little dashboard on your phone. I love checking it. You could check it, as you're going to sleep. You just open it up and see your exact sales for the day. You even see tips on how to improve conversion rates, improve your store. Shopify is literally, when I say it's the dream, I mean it. It is the dream. And we've got a special hookup for listeners. So wait for that in a sec. You can reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. This is one of my favorite parts about Shopify is it has this ecosystem of thousands of third-party apps, developers and teams that are building awesome features for the Shopify ecosystem. So you're getting way more than just Shopify. You're getting thousands of applications built to refine the customer experience for all of your customers. We use probably 8 or 9 of these different apps that Shopify doesn't even build, but it's teams building for the Shopify ecosystem. And were we on a different platform, we just wouldn't have access to these thousands of third-party applications to make MagicMind.com so powerful. You gain insights as you grow with detailed reporting on conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/below-the-line, all lowercase, for a 14-day free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. And this is a unique offer for Below the Line. You're going to get something special when you sign up with that /below-the-line. So make sure to enter that. It is not offered to everybody. So go to shopify.com/below-the-line, all lowercase. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/below-the-line, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/below-the-line. Today's episode is brought to you by Magic Mind. You've heard it on the podcast before. It is my favorite thing about the morning is when I get to take my Magic Mind, 12 magical ingredients that get you into flow state. It is, as Forbes put it, Silicon Valley's new morning elixir for so many reasons. It is, but for me, I'll just say the fact that I get dialed in, not amped up like an energy drink, but dialed into my work so quickly It is basically just motivation, focus, energy, and de-stressing in a bottle. It's really, truly magical. Go to magicmind.co, magicmind.co, enter promo code BTL for below the line, BTL, to get 20% off of your first order and see if it works for you. You can literally tweet at Magic Mind, say whatever you didn't like about it, and you get a free refund. It is so easy to get a refund if you do not dig it. So there's really no reason to not try it and see if it is magical for you. You can go to magicmind.co/love just to see all of the public praise. Pete Holmes, the famous comedian, he doesn't stop tweeting about how magical Magic Mind is for him. So you'll probably see that if you look it up on Twitter. But if you've never tried it, go order it. It's promo code BTL for below the line to get 20% off. And again, you get a free it's easy refund if you don't dig it. magicmind.co and start making magic. Okay, so how has your experience with psychedelics, how big of an impact have they been on your spiritual path if you were to try to give it some type of, qualitative assessment?
Okay, the best way I could describe it is this. You go to the mall in the old days. There's still malls. Go to the store and you smell rose perfume, right? Maybe it's extracted from rose, maybe it's synthetic or whatever, but it's not the same as smelling a rose, right? It's kind of like a rose. If you've never smelled a rose before and you smelled rose perfume, you'd have a pretty good idea of what a rose smelled like, but it still wouldn't be the same as smelling an actual rose. So I think that certain psychedelics give you a reference point for a possible naturally occurring state of consciousness that can come from certain practices, right? So if you're meditating and you're not high, but all of a sudden you have an experience of unitive consciousness or a sense of expanding out, not being compressed in the identity, or even like suddenly you're just not there and then you come back. Now you've got a little bit of a reference point. You're like, holy shit, that was like, I was on LS. That was like when I'm on like a lot of acid. What was that? I'm not on anything right now. So I think you can kind of draw a connection. It gives you a little sense of like, oh, I kind of know what this place is. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad necessarily, but I think it produces a reference point for certain spiritual experiences. And yeah, I think it for me at least, it definitely shows there is a way of experiencing reality that is so far from my normal experience of reality that just that alone teaches you that your default state, your default reality, where you're at right now, it doesn't have to be like that. There's other ways that you can take in this universe that we're in other than just what you just kind of habitually have arrived at over the course of a lifespan. And some people, they like that. That's where they want to be. They like default reality as it is, as they're experiencing it. But some people have trauma. Some people are insecure. Some people are scared. Some people are depressed. Some people have a general sense of lack or a feeling that like something's profoundly off in the way that they are interacting with reality. And so the possibility of maybe there being something outside of that is quite desirable.
What would be an example in your life where you just had that inkling or the questioning or something that has now shifted? Like what is, when you look at 25-year-old Duncan and how old are you now, Duncan?
I'm 48, but I'm saying 46. I'm giving myself 2 years for the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I'm 48, but I've given myself 2.
Yeah. So
we all get to do that, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. What is 46-year-old Duncan see when he looks at 25-year-old Duncan that,
Sure.
actually just stop there.
Fucking hated myself, man. And I was really down on myself. Like I was really, really, really down on myself. And so, I was at odds completely with myself. And I found myself to be a kind of like I don't know, just like massively, incredibly, horribly flawed.
What did that look like day to day?
Just a general inner dialogue where I would feel free to be like, you piece of shit, you idiot, what's wrong with you, you dumb shit. We absorb these things, sadly. If we're around people who do that to us, then that becomes your inner dialogue. And, that's good and bad. There's actually a term for it when I was in liberal arts school, not for self-hate, but if you live in an over-policed neighborhood, which is sadly the case for a lot of people living in like inner city situations, then you can come down with something called cops in the head, where the authority doesn't even have to be there anymore. The cops don't even have to be there, but you're living in a state of feeling like you're being constantly surveilled. And so it's one of the forms of brainwashing that happens in authoritarian regimes. And you get to the point where you don't have to even exert a show of force because people have sort of woven into the fabric of their consciousness the idea that they're constantly being monitored, and at any moment they could be arrested. So if you find yourself with like a parent or a sibling or anyone who over time like bullies you or does shitty things to you, then you will absorb that into yourself. That's one of the ways we hate ourselves, is we think that our inner dialogue is like us, when it might just be an amalgam of like powerful influences on your life that you've woven together as your inner dialogue. So for me, that just looked like, me being completely happily unhappy with myself, and hating myself, as they call it.
What happened between 25 and 46?
Yeah, well, now I understand, that just the other day, I was looking in the mirror and I caught myself going, you fat fuck. And then I'm like, but now, as opposed to 25-year-old me, well, it doesn't matter. This is one of the things that I absorbed into my own self. And so 25-year-old me would just be like, yeah, that's what you say to yourself. But now I'm like, who the fuck is that? What are you talking about? Who just said that? Who in me is saying that, and so it's still there. I mean, it's still in me, but now instead of it's no longer driving the bus. I recognize it as just being one of the many disparate thought patterns that appear in my consciousness throughout the day versus it being something significant.
Well, give me and listeners the long form version of what, not the short form, not 90 seconds, but the long form version of what happened between 25-year-old Duncan. Like, what were you doing? Where were you? City? And what were you doing day to day? And then what happened? What do you think contributed to a shift in perspective from 25 to where you are now, 46, 48?
Yeah.
46. Well,
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I got lucky, and I came into contact with some like really beautiful people over the course of my life, and through their writing, and then I got to meet some of these people.
Who were these people? I want specifics.
Like Ram Dass. I got to meet Ram Dass and spend time with him, and spend time at these retreats, and I got lucky, and I got to be around people who have in their own way, I think, perfected I don't want to say method because it makes it sound too organized, but have discovered a reality, a possibility, a way of being in the world that is based on love, but in not in some cheesy, stupid way, but like where the not being afraid to like keep forgiving yourself and going back to it again and again and again, not being like this idea that we can work on ourselves in a compassionate way over time, and that a shift can happen. It might not be that big a deal, it might just be a tiny little shift, but it's real. I mean, I think this is one of the exciting things that happens if you decide to start playing around with some of the concepts, methods, or philosophies that are out there. Is suddenly it goes from, at least for me, like goes from being a very cynical, jaded, skeptical way of looking at some of these ideas, like these fucking hippies, this is bullshit, none of this stuff is real, it's just wishful thinking, to all of a sudden realizing like, oh my God, I'm not quite as angry as I used to be. I'm not quite, and by not quite 2%, 3%, something like that. For me, at least, it's nothing like incredibly dramatic or anything, but I still get angry. I still blow up in rage. I'll still like find myself furious, but I won't spend like months and months and months lost in my thoughts, angry, confused, vengeful, but against who the fuck knows, or just generally despondent. You know what I mean? It won't be months. It'll be maybe a day, maybe, and then I'll be able to recover from it. And then sometimes I can even like apologize. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I don't know why I did that. Sometimes it comes out of me, so yeah, nothing very, I think one of the, you watch these fucking movies where there's the musical montage or whatever, like they're going to build a house, and then like over the course of an abbreviated song, they've built a house or started a business or gotten in shape, right, or whatever, and I think it's easy to get this idea in your head that that's what this stuff looks like, that when it isn't like that at all. And starting a business is, I'm sure, like, it takes a very long time and it's terrifying, and you go up and down and you don't know, and you fail and fail and fail. Becoming a comedian, same thing. And definitely when it comes to like any kind of spiritual practice, it's like it's kind of gritty. At least my experience of it is just, it's sort of gritty and not very pleasant sometimes, and seemingly pointless at times, and sometimes not good.
Yeah,
it's just like any other thing.
It's like that's a good. It's a good counterbalance. To what you're saying. My experience, similarly, going from being raised Catholic, having a Buddhist influence, father teaching us to meditate when I was 8, to then really going deep into and then kind of moving away from it, really only using it to get things. And it was like, whether I was praying for X, Y, or Z, or meditating for more focus in basketball, or to de-stress. And it was literally just like, how do I bleed this stone for personal gain? And then psychology is just breaking with my wiring for how to approach the world when I was building my last company, and found myself waking up feeling like I was in a nightmare of my own making, waking up in the morning and be like, how the hell did I find myself? How did I create this nightmare for 18 months? And realizing, okay, my psychology is not working. What else is out there? And coming across Alan Watts on YouTube and going thousands of hours and recognize, oh my God, this voice, my dad used to listen to these tapes. And I thought it was so boring. And his old beat up Beamer, there was but an old Beamer, and he kept good care of it, because I'm sure he's going to listen to this episode. But and I used to be like, turn this off. This is terrible, when I was like 10. And now I'm 26, 27, and I'm clinging to this stuff and clinging to messages of non-clinging, because I'm like, nothing else is working. And I would I'd listen to 3 hours of Alan Watts a day in between 12 hours of working. and then living, a somewhat social life with my fiance and then wife, and but I'd sneak in 2 hours, 3 hours to listen to Alan Watts, and then Ram Dass, and now Advaita Vedanta, and it's not like there's no smooth montage of any like house being done. If anything, I'm like still working on the slab, and it's like, shit, it's uneven over there. It's uneven over, and I'm like, man, I thought now 9 years in, I'd be beyond the concrete slab of the house, but it isn't right yet. And I now at least have the sensitivity to know, shit, that's way off. You can't build a house over there. You can't have a north-facing wall over there. Can't. Oh, no. This thing won't sustain, 10 pounds, much less a load-bearing, pillar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then, let's see, how about this idea? The whole idea is, actually you can't, it's all wobbly. There isn't a straight line. There is no way to make the house work because the world as it is impermanent. It's ever changing. And there is actually any attempt that you make, no matter what it may be, to balance things out, find a solid ground, find a place to stand, find a place to level things out. It's fruitless. You can't. It doesn't work. It's like the exercise itself maybe is useful in that it shows you that, but there's no. This is why I really just love Chogyam Trungpa, because he was so good at in so many different ways expressing this. Like he would say, imagine you're standing on a floor of razor blades, and you have, with your mind, imagine there's something that you can grab onto to pull yourself off the razor blades, and then you've burrowed into that imaginary whatever it may be, and you've made a home there, a nest of delusion, imagining that your suffering has been mitigated by this or that or whatever, when it hasn't at all. It's still there, just like it was all the way, and it's going to be there. Because, this is the first noble truth of Buddhism. There is suffering. And not people confuse that and say life is suffering. That is not what I've heard. Is the more accurate translation is there is suffering. And I love that, because life is suffering can just sound like some Elliott Smith lyric or something. Whereas there is suffering is an expression of a sort of centralized suffering reality. And so if there is suffering, then you want that to end, of course, naturally. You don't want to suffer. But the problem is you come up with this idea of how to fix the problem. This is where we run into all the projects that you just mentioned. So, and this is where what Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche knew would be a problem in the West. This is where spiritual materialism shows up, which is the idea being that where you get ultimately confused because you start working on you start investing in your spirituality like a bank account or a business or something like that, right? You start really, and then accidentally what ends up happening is you start building a house instead of tearing a house down. You know what I mean? You actually start doing the opposite thing. Now you're building this fortress of spirituality, and you're, putting in turrets and flags, and things are waving in the wind, and you're building it. You're thinking, when the house is
putting
done,
promotional flyers out. Come to this. Come to this. Come to this. Come.
You don't mean it's really a kind of pathetic situation, because you have a legitimate desire to not suffer anymore, and that's and the nature of that is compassionate. You're being compassionate towards yourself, but the methodology actually becomes the opposite of what maybe you would need to do if you wanted, hopefully, to not find yourself in such a neurotic state. And so, there that again, that's where like these tricks of or phrases like abandon all hopes of fruition. That this is why the meditation group we do on my Patreon is called Journey into Boredom, because we hate to be bored. Like people, when I was a kid, it was like the worst thing that can happen to you as a kid is you get bored. And so boredom in our society is just, God forbid you should find yourself fucking bored. Like your phone runs out of juice and you're, sitting in a restaurant and you can't look at your phone while you're waiting for the food. And so now you just have to like look around and you realize like, God, this sucks. I'm bored. So boredom is suffering, Boredom really is, if you look deeply into boredom, you realize, boredom is a lot of things bundled up into one, a general fundamental dissatisfaction with life as it is, right? That's boredom. And to fix the problem of boredom or suffering, we distract ourselves. And that distraction doesn't really seem to do the trick, does it? It's like you can, there are like, if anything, temporarily, you'll find yourself absorbed into a TV show, a relationship, business, a method, whatever, and you've really gotten yourself distracted enough that you aren't recognizing this suffering reality, the reality of suffering. But that doesn't fix the problem, because as soon as this is why you hear about comics after they did the Tonight Show or whatever, they want to kill themselves.
Really?
They finally got on the Tonight Show. Oh yeah, well, not literally, but they get
right,
depressed.
But I didn't even know this was a thing.
This was an old thing, because the Tonight, it's different now. In the old days, that was one of the only ways that you could like signal boost yourself as a comedian, is those late night shows. But in those days, you would work really hard to get there. And then finally, then you're there. And then the next day happens. And you're still you. It didn't fix anything. Like now maybe you have gotten some success. You know this, If God forbid you just, no matter what, you're still confronted with yourself. There's nothing in the phenomenal world that can like really work to fix this issue, externally. This is the problem. This is the problem. And like every single one of us has tried. Some people have like tried spectacularly, and have gone through all kinds of hellscapes to like accrue this or that, or get their body to look a certain way, or get to a certain place. It didn't work though. They're still fucking miserable. Meet any sex addict. You know what I mean? It's the craziest thing. Like they're fucking like 15 people at once. They're still desperate and sad and crazy, and like it's not working. That's the thing. It doesn't really work. So anyway, this is where eventually, hopefully, you realize that this shit isn't working. This is the story of Buddhism, which I love, especially when you like put it next to Christianity. Christianity, you have a prince who is born in a manger. In Buddhism, you have a prince born in a palace. And it's really interesting that both of these world religions start off with princes. But in Buddhism, the prince leaves the palace because his father wanted him to, thought that by sequestering him away from the reality of the world, he could keep him from being what it was prophesized he would become, which is a Buddha, the Tathagata or whatever you call it. So it was a really idiot idea of his father's, which is like, I'll just keep him in here. He's going to have a fucking harem. He's going to love pleasure, power. But it didn't work because he witnessed the reality of the suffering of the world. And so he abandoned all of that and went into the forest and became an ascetic, So that Buddhism starts off with an acknowledgement of like, yeah, I'm sorry, but the world stuff is not really going to scratch the itch that you think it's going to scratch. But it definitely helps a lot if you're like need food and stuff. I'm not saying, I think we both have to be very careful, because you could accidentally get into a place where you're like, we're so privileged, we're so lucky, we have all this stuff, You know what I mean? We're still lucky.
Yeah.
And so if you're not careful,
none of this shit matters, and an $80
and
DoorDash lunch
like,
is on its way to you.
Fuck you. Oh, really? None of it matters, huh? You have health care, motherfucker.
Right.
If I go to the doctor, I can't afford to go to the doctor. Oh, it doesn't matter. I got to get my kids to the fucking doctor. My kids can't afford fucking antibiotics. Oh, it really doesn't matter. So I'm sensitive to that, and I understand. I like having, in my own way, like been dead fucking broke and knowing what that's like and like how you grit your teeth at night and stuff. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we have to fulfill these things no matter what: food, shelter, community, all that stuff. But if you are entertaining an idea that something outside of that, something outside of those basics, some people think if they became famous, that they're going to feel better. Ooh. And I know you know what I'm saying. Like when in business, some people think that should they achieve this level with their business or something like that, it's going to assuage the stress that they're waking up to and going to sleep with every single fucking day, when it has the opposite effect. So I think that is sort of the bullseye that Buddhism is trying to get you to look at, which is like, it kind of doesn't work. You can try, go ahead and try, but it's really not going to work, because if it did work, then we wouldn't be living in the kind of world that we're living in, because the wealthy people are controlling everything. They hire lobbyists, they control politicians. The wealthy people are controlling the fucking world. And look at the world. Does that look like the product of a healthy consciousness? Does like shooting missiles into cities or invading to try to get more,
2,600 advertisements a day that the average American consumes.
So I think from looking at the world and making, I think, a fair assessment, which is the world is the way it is because of greed, and the greed is coming from the people who are in control, and the people who are in control in general are incredibly wealthy. Then you know what I mean? Like this is the, again and again, people scratch their heads and they look at like this billionaire, that billionaire, and they're like, but if you had that much money, you could change the world in a few days, theoretically. You could get food to kids who need it. You could get health care to kids who need it. You could do so much with what you have, but you're not. What's going on? And well, the answer is because they're whatever their mind is like, it's not that kind of mind. And so this, I think, like shows you, oh, okay, the wealth thing isn't making them happy. Happy people are generous, man, aren't they? Yeah. You know, when you get around really happy people, they're spontaneously, naturally generous. It's one of the products of being happy.
Yeah, actually, there's one of my last guests that was on the podcast, Dr. Molly Maloof. She was saying that when we are generous, if there was like a powdered donut in between us, and if I offer it to you and I give you the last donut, my body will release oxytocin, which the neurochemical that tells me I'm safe. By giving away, by being generous, I realize in some evolutionary way, it's actually quite easy to see why this would evolutionarily be wired into us. I realize, oh, now Duncan's going to think higher of me. He's going to help me when I need something. Now I'm going to give 3 donuts away. Wow, now I have 3 different people that are that I know that I could call on. Versus, and I had heard that of like when you give a hug, you release more oxytocin than if you were to receive a hug. You feel safer by giving a hug than even receiving a hug. And I think I'd heard that oxytocin kind of factoid before, but she said the opposite is also true. If there's one remaining donut and I take it and say, oh, is it okay if I have it? The most polite way of taking it, but if I take it, my body will release vasopressin, which is the neurochemical of fear. I will feel fearful if I take that last donut. If I'm siphoning energy or resources from my community or my employee base, if I'm running a company, that siphoning is going to create a neurological state of fear, even if my resources are climbing, versus the generosity. My resources might be depleting, but I'm feeling safer. My neurological state is gaining safety. So fascinating when she told me that.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is that's so cool. And that's it. Cause like the more stuff you have, the more you have to guard it. And then to guard it, it costs more stuff. And then your whole life just becomes defense. It's like you're just trying to guard your fucking pile of whatever it is. And that doesn't apply just to people who have stuff. It applies to like the, defense mechanisms that you put around your own self for guarding whatever you think you are. What guarding is a very taxing way to live in the world. And yeah, so you sort of, this is, I think, one of the possible psychedelic epiphanies. It's one of the spiritual epiphanies. It's an epiphany parents have, I think, which is the most seemingly mundane things, like cooking pancakes for your kids and watching them eat the pancakes, will fill you with more joy than getting paid, making, achieving some worldly thing, or going to this has been one of the incredible gifts of being a parent for me is I've had peak experiences with my kids that even like just the right amount of acid and ketamine and like sex at Burning Man doesn't come close to like just that moment where like, my kid's like, you're my best friend. That's like, I'm in heaven. This is heaven. You know what I mean? This and it's not quantifiable. You can't sell it. You can't buy it. This is why we love Christianity, right? Like, what does Jesus say? Why store up things on earth where, what does it say? Rot and mold is corrupt. Like, why do that? Or behold the lilies in the field. They do not toil, nor do they sow or something like that. But look how my Father in heaven has clothed them. How much greater do you think he'll clothe you? So these are all like references to this idea of there being a fundamental goodness in reality that can't be bought, can't be sold, that you already have, you can't achieve, that there's no way to gain it because it's yours, like it's your inheritance, it's already there. But if you're trying to inflate your ego, this is bad news actually, because that means everybody has it.
Yeah.
We all have it. It's all everyone has it. So then what the fuck are we going to do now? How do I achieve some state of feeling like more advanced up there? How do I hierarchize myself? How do I pedestalize myself if all of this stuff that we've used as like weird symbols that we wear, drive around in or whatever are actually valueless?
And maybe even negative value, like the very thing that's distracting you from the discovery of what's right beneath your feet, what you're already on. It's easy way to take that for granted or miss it completely is to feel like it needs to be a sojourn away from wherever you are. Yeah, right. Yeah, and then gives you a project. Now that you have the project, you can like get completely distracted. And so, yeah, I mean, I've it's one of them. It's very frustrating, actually. I think it's like that's a quality of it is it's quite frustrating, and it shouldn't be, but it is. I don't know why. It's just frustrating. It's like, who gives a fuck what really ultimately, who gives a fuck about whatever the thing is that in Buddhism, you're invited to ask yourselves a question. What do you come into the world with, and what do you leave the world with? What when you leave the world, what do you get to carry? What do you get? What are you carrying with you over there? Nothing. Literally everything that this shirt is going to exist way longer than my body. Your neon sign, your microphone, the table in front of you, your hat, your shoes, they're probably going to be around, longer than you. And people seem to forget that for some reason. And it's one of the reasons I love crypto is that you can take that with you.
Yeah, I know. They have blockchain in heaven.
You can take your.
You can put it in. Yeah.
You get 32-digit
can.
wallet addresses that you can take with you, but that's it. But you could.
Your MetaMask goes into heaven. Yeah, I know that. Or you can take it into your next incarnation.
This episode is also brought to you by Chargebee. Imagine this. You're launching your subscription product and you need to invoice your first few customers. You integrate with a payment gateway, write some code to support recurring billing, and you start charging things up. Stuff seems to work until you need to create tax-compliant invoices or set up flexible trials and run pricing experiments. Yikes. Or integrate with more than one gateway. Yoinks. Billing needs grow as business needs grow. Every line of code you write for your billing system contributes to the spaghetti nightmare that will keep you away from your core product. Don't do that. Chargebee is here to help. We replace in-house billing systems and spreadsheets by giving teams the ability to set up subscription plans and trials, run pricing experiments at scale, analyze accurate subscription analytics, accept multiple payment methods, and much, much more right out of the box. Chargebee works with global payment gateways like Stripe, Braintree, PayPal, everybody, and integrates with essential tools like HubSpot, Baremetrics, Xero, QuickBooks, Salesforce, and much more. Chargebee, Chargebee, Chargebee. The journey to the first million is often the hardest. To help you get there faster, we're offering free access to Chargebee's Rise plan. This offer is valid until you hit your first $1 million in revenue. This is a meeting that goes back 2 weeks ago. Me and the CEO, I said, this isn't enough at 500K. This isn't enough at 750. This offer should be valid until customers hit their first million in revenue. And that's how we came to this decision. So you don't have to worry about billing and subscription management in the marathon that is running your business. To avail the services. Love that. I'm going to start using that phrase as often as possible. To avail the services. Sign up for a Chargebee account with the link in our show notes for chargebee.com/partners. Sign up and enter your details with the coupon code BTL for below the line BTL. And then you complete your sign up within seconds. Super easy. Chargebee rocks. Well, you mentioned psychedelic epiphany, spiritual epiphany, parenthood epiphany. Where has something, and you've kind of touched on it, but I want to ask it explicitly, has the value of psychedelics waned over time, changed over time?
I'm a dad now. So you know what that's like. I got a 1-year-old. My friend Tom Papa was saying, like, being a parent is like being a volunteer fireman. You know, like I can't be fucked up. I can't be like high. I can't be in a K-hole. You know, I can't. I got like, it's, you know what it's like? It's like a lunatic asylum. You know, it's like these kids are wild.
Yep, we've got a 1 in 4. Yep.
I got to be able to like move quick when you hear that certain scream. You know it as a parent. You're like, shit, you got to get down there, find out what's going on and fix it. I can't. So I can't, I can't take psychedelics, right? I just can't. As a responsible parent, I can't do that. And I don't feel bad about that at all. I have had at least 2 decades, probably more, of consistent experimentation with psychedelics. I'm okay. So it's not like I'm like, oh God, I really miss that. And it's not like it's gone forever. If maybe we go out of town or something, and the kids are with their nana or something, in that case, maybe then safely I'll dive back in for a second. But so I'll always love psychedelics for the rest of my life. And I love knowing that people are studying them, evolving them. You know what I mean? I love that, like, every year, every 2 years, there's probably going to be a new, like, Shulgin tryptamine or some new who knows what that they've discovered. That's exciting to me. But yeah, so right now, I can't really. You're like
Napoleon in exile, but just watching and hearing news of the army just recongregating.
Yeah. And I love it, man. I love it. I love the young people these days they aren't, they're not like, they're not so much under the shadow of the war on drugs, which we went through, and there's all kinds of research out there. There's actual above ground psychedelic therapy you can get.
One of my good friends, his psychiatrist, it literally said, "Hey, I think you should try microdosing. I can't get that for you, but I think you should try it." And as a psychiatrist for a decade, it's just like, hey, these other golf clubs we're trying aren't working, but there are more out there than the 6 that I can prescribe. So you should try it. And the research seems to support that. It's also obviously just wonderful. The dawn of us really taking these things seriously. And at the same time, every disclaimer applies of like, you wouldn't just hear like, oh, this surgery could be helpful, and then you go into just like the first dude in the jungle that's offering that surgery, and then they're just working on your gallbladder. Like maybe that option could be helpful for you, but take it as seriously as you would take, going to get someone to give you braces.
True.
Within when you touched on the Buddhism and Christianity contrast. And you have this prince in the palace, and you have this this prince by perhaps destiny, but a pauper in a manger. And I remember Alan Watts saying there's no wonder that you have one philosophy in Buddhism that takes to wealthy people that have means, because they realize this isn't it. And there's a quality to Buddhism that resonates with that prince in the palace that realizes this isn't it, and there's still suffering right at the door, no matter what. And you have a philosophy, worldview, a religion within Christianity that takes to the slaves, that takes to the extremely poor, and there's and obviously the whole Old Testament, much of the Old Testament is about getting out of slavery. And I found it a really interesting contrast of where, at least a thought exercise of where the world might go in terms of receptivity for either and or. There's elements that I think are going to resurface of Christianity that we've overlooked for 1,700 years, 1,800 years. And then I think there are elements within Eastern philosophy that are going to, and have been for the last 50 years, we touched on previous waves, but continue to infiltrate Western minds, because we do seemingly have everything, and yet we still know suffering is just right on the other side of an 8-inch wall. It is just so close.
Other side, you're in the fucking wall.
Right.
You got, think about it. Like every single person living on the planet, no matter wherever they might find themselves in the socioeconomic spectrum, is going to get old, is going to have to deal with disease, and will most certainly die. There is no wall that can separate you from these realities right now. There's fantasies that they might exist. We might be able to slow down, reverse the aging process, upload our consciousness into the internet. There might be ultimately nanobots that can cure all diseases, but that's not where we're at right now. So you can pretend that there's a wall separating you from that, but there is no wall. There's no way out. And this is what equalizes everything. This is what equalizes everything. This is, and this is the truth. So there is, and I think that what Buddhism and Christianity have in common, what makes them, to me, revolutionary philosophies, is that both of them are inviting you to save yourself. Even though in Christianity it might not seem like that, but in Buddhism, this isn't a faith-based religion. You have to. Part of the religion is you have to scrutinize every bit of it, break it into pieces and reassemble it and look at it and make sure it's right. That's part of the practice. Christianity, the version of it that I think exists in Christianity is that there isn't a priest class. That the reason that Jesus was pissing everybody off was he was eliminating this ridiculous, completely unnecessary intermediary group of people claiming that you needed them if you wanted to talk to God. And if you want to really like make religion lose a lot of money, just get rid of the priest class. Invite people to connect with God, reality, the Dharma on their own, in their own way, in an honest way, as they are, and show them that there is no one who's going to do this for you. No one's got a telephone that's going to call God. Or what Chogyam Trungpa called it is spiritual hitchhiking. You don't need to get in someone else's vehicle. You have your own vehicle. It's your body, your incarnation. And just where you are right now is exactly the right place to be to do this. So to me, both of them are liberating in that way, in that it is showing you like, really, this is between you and love. It's between you and the universe, and the nobody else. No one else. No one's gonna die for you. No one's gonna you're gonna have to go through the death process yourself. But there is this possibility of waking up to a transcendent reality that can't be packaged, can't be quantified, can't be bought or sold. This is the whole story of Jesus in the temple, it was that's obviously, he's like, what the, that was Jesus railing against spiritual materialism when he yelled out, "This is my Father's house," which is, a rejection of people trying to package this shit, trying to sell it, trying to make themselves the purveyor. And that's why I was talking about the guru disease earlier. Not to say that there aren't people who are mystics and who are singularly focused on helping people with their suffering, but but those people, they don't really have much of an identity. There's not much there.
Right.
We come to understand that they're kind of empty, versus the other side of it, which is like someone who's so like full of all this bullshit and then suggesting that they can free you of yours. There's a big difference, because it's all up to you. It all boils down to you. No one's coming to save you. No one's coming to help. There is no UFO. Nothing's coming. There's no great alien at the end of time. The singularity isn't going to save you. Nothing's going to save you. Money isn't going to save you. Hating money isn't going to save you. Becoming the emperor of the planet won't save you. Becoming the emperor of the universe won't save you. Nothing is going to save you. Nothing can help you except you. And you're already saved. Fuck. That's the whole problem. What are we going to do if we're already saved? Now what do we do? Now what? When I met Ram Dass, I said, "Are you my guru?" He goes, "Sure. Now what?" It was the funniest thing. Like, now what? You're still in the same boat, kid. Now, yeah. I think that's there. Yeah.
No, keep going.
That's it, man. I just think like a constant self-reminder of that is quite invigorating. I mean, how wonderful is that? You don't have to go.
That is the cold dip.
It's the cold dip. It's the cold dip. You don't have to go to the South America and slurp back ayahuasca. You don't have to go to a million retreats. You don't have to go to this thing or that thing or this or whatever. What if right now, as you are, you can completely connect with whatever you want to call it, God, right, source, fundamental goodness, love, whatever it is. And that this is the story of the prodigal son, isn't it? Like the miscreant inheritor goes out into the world, fucks everything up, comes home expecting to be fully rejected by his father for all of his like misbehavior, and instead is given everything. That, and we're all that. We're carrying around all this guilt. I don't deserve that. What are you talking about? I don't deserve to be fully embraced by the source from which all things emanate, because boy, am I rotten. It's like, actually, you're not. And you already are embraced. It's just, this is where it all comes down to, you're just the last little piece of the puzzle that isn't doing that. You're the one little, this is why they call it surrender, isn't it? Because you're in this stupid war, where winning the war means being disconnected from love. That's winning. You're constantly pushing back all these reminders around you that you are in a magical universe, and that you are the whole thing. All of it is for you, not in a narcissistic way. It's for everybody else too, but this is for you. This is yours. This is yours. And it's all for you. You deserve it. That's the main thing. People who've been abused, they don't think they deserve anything. They're always apologizing. And they don't think they deserve it. They find someone who loves them. And they're like, how could you love me? They fuck up relationships that way because they don't think they deserve love or whatever.
Right.
But it doesn't matter whether you think you deserve it or not. It's yours. You have to just deal with that. You have to deal with it. And this is in Christianity, the constant reminder. The kingdom of heaven is here, now, here. It's as close as your heart. It's right here. And that's a really exciting thing. And it's fun to forget it too, and live in the hell realms for a little bit. And it's really fun to remember it. Kind of like when you're in a shitty dream where you're like being chased by a gorilla or something. And you're like, wait, this is a dream. And then you wake up and you're like, wow, that's just a dream. Similar, except that can happen while you're alive and seemingly awake in the longer dream of our incarnation.
Right. Yeah, that is the Vedantic principle of just the three states that we're accustomed to. Deep sleep, nothing's happening. Dream state, you think there's an entire world of gravity and walls, and you're wearing shoes and clothes and other people, and there's drama. You're creating it. Once you wake up, you knew you created the whole thing, and yet you still didn't know what was going to happen. And yeah. Which is so trippy, of like, you were doing it all, and yet you didn't know what was going to happen. Right. And it wasn't even real. And the Vedantic viewpoint that the waking state is just an elevated version of that dream. All of these things that we think are real, right. It's the exact same thing playing out. You mentioned the prodigal son, Pete Holmes, who you introed me to, was on the podcast recently, and he used this line that kind of blew my mind. He said, that's the comedians, they have closers, their best material. And he said, Jesus is quoted in a whole host of different things and said many different things, but he had a routine. He had his standard set of stories and parables that he would tell as he preached for 3 years straight, walking to and from villages. And he said his closer was the prodigal son. That was his best material. And
that wasn't his closer.
Oh, really?
You know what his closer was?
What?
What's the difference between a chickpea and a garbanzo bean?
What?
It doesn't cost $500 to have a garbanzo bean in your mouth. That joke is what got him crucified, actually.
Yeah,
people don't know that. You got to read the Gnostic scriptures. Everything was fine. They were going to let him go. And he's like, hey, wait, have you heard this one? That's immediate lashing, crown of thorns. That's his closer. The prodigal son, it's okay. I wouldn't call it funny, though.
Dude, I remember that from when I read the Gnostic Gospel, and Pontius Pilate was like, that's kind of hilarious, y'all. And Nicodemus was like, no.
No. Fuck that, it's too blue. Jesus was working blue.
He was saying that was his prodigal son was his closer, and that the good news, which we take as like the New Testament of like, you got to know all 27 books to know the good news. The Bible is the good news, and there's an Old Testament, New Testament, thousands of verses. And he's like, no. No one had that. When he was talking to you in a group of 45 people listening to him, you might have had 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And he was delivering the good news every time he was teaching in public. And this closer of the prodigal son, to exactly what you're saying, is this story of that. In his words, he said, it might as well be told the forgiving father, that this son comes back after pissing away everything, thinking it is so bad that I'm going to go be a servant in my father's house. And I've been sleeping with pigs, like all of these cultural things of that's the lowest of the low. And the father throws this massive banquet for this returning son. And the good news is everything, the Father speaking to us, God speaking to us, saying, everything I have is yours, and I am with you always. That's the good news.
I mean, I guess it depends on who your father is.
Yeah. Well, if it's G-O-D, you're in...
Yeah, I'm giving you you could have a $20,000 in debt.
Everything.
You can have my credit card bills, motherfucker. You know, some people I've heard some people they'll get calls from creditors after their parents pass, where they're asking them to pay. Anyway, I don't mean to blow that up. I think it's a beautiful thing that flies in the face, and that's what I love about all these mystical teachings, wherever they are. Usually, it flies in the face of how we understand life to be, but in the most beautiful way. You know, because everyone just thinks they're a piece of shit. People are generally just completely another great verse in the Bible. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, which means you don't have to be in charge of giving yourself justice for your perceived crimes, because that whatever that may be, whatever the bill is that you're gonna have to pay, you don't have to worry about it. That's all gonna get taken care of. So you could just you don't have to self-crucify. You could drop that job altogether and just sort of be where you're at. And again, for me, that just means trying just to be a little less hard on myself. And then the more I can, pull that off, then I find that I'm a little less hard on the people around me as a natural byproduct. But generally most people are pretty easy on everybody else. Most people, they're like, yeah, that's okay. Don't worry about it. But they make any kind of little mistake. They do one thing wrong, these perfectionists out there, and they fucking whip their own backs psychologically for years sometimes. It's really sad. I mean, have you ever had somebody apologize to you in a heartfelt way for something that you can't remember they did? Have you ever had that happen? They've been
I think so.
tormenting themselves.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Carrying it around with them.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, right.
I don't even you don't want to tell them, I don't remember that. You don't want to tell them, I was half asleep that year. I don't remember that you did that. You want to accept the apology. But you realize, oh my God, they've been carrying this weight around with them. And I don't remember it.
Yeah. I think something that you mentioned that's worth underscoring is that what you said about that I hadn't really given a whole lot of thought of Christ coming and saying you don't need these intermediaries, and how obviously shattering that is to the structure that it's so you can tell how strong the structure is when it sounds extremely sacrosanct, just to even hear it now. If you're to tell that to someone that's lifelong Baptist in Kansas City, and you just tell them no, you don't need your church, the recoil would be instantaneous, because they think the physical church is where it's at, and they'd actually think it's probably quite anathema to them getting into their perceived, their goal, their heaven. And yet there's Richard Rohr, is Franciscan friar, great, amazing author, great book, Universal Christ. And he's a Franciscan friar, he's a priest, and he says the second coming of Christ is you. That's the second coming, is you realizing your Christhood, your union with God. Not being Jesus, not going through all, and he talks about how Jesus says, I'm going to misquote the number, but it's like, he says 14 times, follow me. He doesn't say worship me. He says, follow me.
Big difference between those two. You know, following versus worship. It's like, and it's so easy to, and again, people would say that's blasphemy saying that. And I think you can get confused because, I think the second coming of all of, Maitreya, all the, whatever the next thing is going to be an us, not an I. And so it has to be that way. Like we're all realizing it now over and over again. How many times are we going to, I was just talking to Wim Hof about this on my podcast, but how many times are we going to centralize? How many times are we going to do this thing where we get these sociopathic narcissists in front of nuclear codes? Like, how many times are we going to let that happen? How many times are we going to entertain the idea that someone other than us is going to save us? And like, we are seemingly repeating a pattern that works in groups of like 100 people. You do need someone to steer the ship, right? You can't have a shit ton of people all with their hands on the wheel. One person drives the car. It's fine. It's just, it doesn't work for millions of people. It's not working. Centralization is really causing all kinds of problems. So it's got to be a we. It's got to be some kind of, I don't know, collective recognition of of how beautiful a we is versus an I, and how incredible that is, a we. This is something Ram Dass was so good at talking about, is this idea of becoming nobody. Like letting yourself fade out a little bit and letting the we appear, because it's so much better. I have one brain, you have one brain. You know what it's like. But I think one of the, maybe we've been bashing business a little bit too much here, but when you have like a group of people synced up with a shared goal, and you get to experience what that's like to shift into a shared consciousness with a group of people creating together, like, it's one of the greatest feelings there is. It's one of the most beautiful things to realize what a group of people engaged in something creative together, what that feels like, and how much better the stuff that a group of people can create collaboratively than what one person creates. And so I think it's going to be a we, the Messiah, Jesus, the Maitreya, whatever it is. Either that or it's going to be some AI that just annihilates all of us because it recognizes we're sort of obsolete. One or the other.
And maybe it will realize it's a we before it does that.
I think it'll be like, you should have realized you're a we, and then it'll evaporate us. Either way, we're still going out together.
Well, the universe, if nothing else, it'll teach you the lesson patiently over and over and over again until it sinks in. I think that's a beautiful thought, and I would subscribe to it. It is a we. It's not when Richard Rohr says like the second coming is you. It's not you, John Roberts, Sarah Smith. It's not that person. That wasn't. In fact, that is a part of his big distinction. Is there's Jesus the man, and then there's Christ. Christ is this anointed union with God that is very different than Jesus, the guy walking up and down the streets of Jerusalem. They're very, very different. And that consciousness that he touches into renders that being, that body, so to choose the word precisely, irrelevant to the consciousness, that it can go through an incredible torture and death because it is irrelevant to the consciousness in which it has merged with.
Have you ever entertained the possibility that we're actually still being crucified? Like Philip K. Dick kind of talked about that okay, so like just adhering to like the idea that Jesus truly was the Son of God, like truly was divine and was a God that was also a human. And then that killing that God was like the spiritual equivalent of splitting the atom. Like it was a like matter, like temporal matter and eternal reality being sort of killed, that created such a powerful shockwave that we're still in it. That, in other words, like when Jesus said, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" in that moment, that's when the Big Bang happened. That's when reality sprang into existence, and that every single one of us is Christ right now in the phase of crucifixion, just before the surrender. And that's us right now. And that when he says that, it's like us coming to, we're going to look and be like, oh, fuck, right. I'm being crucified. I'm Jesus. And then that's where you say, into your hands, I commend my spirit. It is finished. Then that's it. Then we're done. But you can't get there without the why have you forsaken me? And that's what the world is right now. The world is, Father, why have you forsaken me? Lack, limitation, fear. These are the things driving the economy right now. And driving not just the financial economy, but literally like causing like all the configurations in society to exist based on lack, fear, limitation, vengeance, all these things. We're working through it.
The Kali
we haven't
Yuga.
gotten to the into your hands I commend my spirit. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, where we literally are being crucified right now. You're just having a hallucination where you think that you're going through some life or something like that. But it's good news, bad news. I don't know.
Well, it's certainly, it depends on like you said, your metabolism. But it seems
how you handle crucifixion depends on your metabolism. It's not everybody like
it's not everyone's cup of
the
tea.
same way. Some people really don't like it.
Hey, listen, it was profound for me. It was profound for me, but I don't, disclaimer, it might not be right for you, but it is what gave me union with the eternal and infinite, and I wouldn't give that up for all the world.
Yeah. Exactly.
Start
small.
Yeah. Yes. Amen, dude. That is profound. What you just said. Start small, and I think within this, within that thought of you're in the crucifixion, it is metaphorically we absolutely are at this point, but before surrender, before liberation. I don't presently know anyone in Los Angeles that is liberated. And so by definition, they are, and maybe they're there and they're, hiding in the Santa Monica Mountains, or they're just walking around Whole Foods right now, keeping it to themselves. But for the most part, most aren't. And that means that they are imprisoned. They are shackled, and they're not just like lightly imprisoned. They are in mind, body, spirit on, let's say, this metaphorical cross. They are not liberated. And I mean, it's pretty binary. You're either imprisoned or liberated. And if you are imprisoned, there is a surrender. At least my philosophical view is there is a surrender.
Well, look, I'm not trying to shame us here, but there are people who aren't doing podcasts who are like out there right now just getting medicine to people and stuff. Don't you ever think that, like, that this is what's so funny about this line of conversation that we're having, which I adore and I love it, but sometimes I will, one of my there's in Buddhism, there's something called wrathfulness is one of the teachings, one of the ways to teach, and we get confused because wrath is like, you motherfucker, but wrathfulness is actually quite often said with a smile and love. Like, it's usually said with like a sweetness. But once I had Mark Duplass on my podcast, I fucking love his movies. Oh my God, the Duplass brothers, are you kidding me? Like, they like created a revolution in cinema. They're incredible, and they're also incredible people. But I remember just somewhere in the podcast, he goes, A younger version of me would be like, why are we sitting here talking? Let's go and make stuff. I saw a version that hurt. Oh, I still sting from it because it's like, you're right. What am I doing? Talking about creating instead of creating. And I saw Robert Thurman at one of these Ram Dass retreats. And he goes, practice, practice, practice. Everyone's practicing. When are you going to perform? You know what I mean? At what point do you stop practicing and get on stage and play the fucking piano or whatever the thing is? You know what I mean? So this is, sometimes you'll run in to these people and they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, sure, whatever. The chakras and all the stuff and the thing. And they're just like helping, not even thinking about it. You know what I mean? They're like out there actively. You know I've seen some people like this out there. Like there's a teacher, Roshi Joan Halifax. She's just fucking like, she's a Buddhist teacher, but she's also like actively engaged in like this kind of Buddhist activism where she's like, just getting blankets and medicine to people. I'm again not trying to shame us. I think you are engaged socially. I know you are.
So I think a younger version of me would agree with what you're just saying. I actually think my version would push back and say you got to find the truth to speak the truth, and I think this is part of the finding. And in fact, you mentioned to me one time that a story that really blew my mind. Do you mind telling listeners before I let you go the story of, and feel free to retort what I just retorted with, but the story you said of followers going to Buddha and asking what's most important, the Buddha, the Dharma.
Oh yeah.
And Sangha.
The community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the answer was the community. It was the only answer that worked because the meaning, so basically the idea is like, is any of the three jewels or any of these more important than the other? You, the awakened teacher, embodied teacher, the teachings themselves, or the community of Buddhists, which, by the way, Buddha means awakened consciousness. So that applies not just to like Buddhism itself, but this waking up. So yeah, the answer was the community. Thank God. I mean, because otherwise, it'd be a cult of personality. And also what that means is that if you had the opportunity to go back in time and meet Shakyamuni Buddha, you'd be wasting your time because all you have to do is get around a community of seekers. The retort would just be, you're talking about saying the church isn't important. Well, actually, I think the idea of the church as the body of Christ is important because, again, this is decentralized. The church as community, the church as community, where more than two of you are present, there I will be. That church, that church. And so when you look at the crucifixion from that perspective, really what you see is like the rising from the dead on the third day and ascending into heaven. Well, we're seeing that in the church, in the spiritual community. What you're seeing is an interdimensional being of love embodying itself in the connections between people who are prioritizing love. And in that connection, this other thing enters the room, which we've all felt if you've ever been to a church, a spiritual center, and you feel that. You realize like, oh shit, this is not a one-way street. There's something here for real. So yeah, so that's actually quite exciting. And very frustrating for the world, because the world being like Mara, Satan, when Jesus was in the desert, and you look at like all the tricks, like this metaphor for the world was trying to employ to capture that energy. Worship me. Why don't you worship me? Or why don't you turn these stones into bread? I love that. Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov, writes about this and points out that wasn't just Satan saying, why don't you feed yourself? You're hungry. You could turn stones into bread. Why don't you do that? And that's when Jesus said, you can't live by bread alone. But really what that was a moment where Satan was inviting a theocracy. Satan was saying, why don't you form a church and become the purveyor of food for the world? And which would be, that's a theocracy. It's horrible. As an invitation to...
Why is
Jesus
that horrible?
Didn't give well, because now we've centralized. Now all of a sudden the whole world has got to be dependent on this organization to get food. This is again like, I will make you fishers of men. I will teach you to fish. I will give you, follow me. Don't worship me. If I start feeding, if suddenly there's a transaction here where if you come to me, I'm going to give you food, money, fame, all the stuff that in the satanic agreement is always suggested. I will, in the story of Faust and all of that, it's like, I'm going to give you everything you want. All you got to do is give me something and then you can have it. So, so the moment that happens, now we're in a transaction. Now it's capitalism. Now it's no longer, oh, no. I'm just going to give you everything. Well, but what do I need to do? Nothing. I'm just going to give it all to you. You're just going to get it. But wait, isn't there something you want from me? No, actually, nothing. What the fuck? But I want to, it really fucks with your ego, right? Like, so that moment of, in the invitation to turn bread or stones into bread was a big moment where it was like pointing out, we're not going to do that. It's not going to be like that. We're not going to feed the world in the way that like we could potentially. And we see that again in the division of the bread and the fish. It's a direct refutation, seemingly the opposite of now Jesus is just feeding everybody. Now suddenly there is infinite food, infinite fish for everybody. Like suddenly, but that was like the disciples doing that. They were going around and like giving the baskets and it kept replenishing. And again, this was the other thing Jesus kept saying is like, you can do this too.
Right.
Like, don't you have faith? Don't you believe? If you had faith of the mustard seed, you could move mountains.
Right.
All of this stuff.
You shall
was
do
never
greater things than this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. See, this is really decentralized. It really is like, it's not me. It's not me. You can do it. And for some reason, we just don't want to accept that. Maybe it's too much power, or maybe it's too scary, or maybe, I don't know what it is. We don't want that. Like, if you're going to pray for forgiveness, you have to accept forgiveness. You know what I'm talking about? Like, a lot of people I'm always praying for forgiveness. I realize that at night, I'm like, please, God, forgive me. Please, God, forgive me. And then I realized, like, shit, why am I doing this every night? Because, like, if you're asking forgiveness, you don't, then you don't have to, and you don't accept forgiveness, then you can keep fucking up successfully. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to alter yourself. If you accept forgiveness, like if you really have fucked somebody over, and they're like, I really forgive you, that implicit in that is like, don't do that anymore. Like, if you really were so distraught by what you did that you are coming to me to ask me to forgive you, then that must mean you want to change. Surely you're not going to do the exact same thing to me tomorrow or the next day or whatever. So I think maybe that's why the acceptance of this kind of love, maybe it's scary because it might necessitate an actual change in behavior or something. It might, maybe, I don't know. I'm babbling now. What? I got to go. Speaking of change of behavior, I got to go get my kids back.
Okay.
All this
then
spiritual bullshit.
That's right. You're on Eastern time. You got to get going. But that is implied in the prodigal son, I guess. And it's never explicit, is that he accepts that forgiveness. Yeah. That is part of.
Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah. Well, Duncan, as every conversation is with you, as so much fun and true Sangha, true community, and it's.
Thank you for letting me be on your show, man.
Are you kidding? Thank you for taking the time. Where can people find out about you and Duncan Trussell Family Hour?
It's all at DuncanTrussell.com. That's my podcast. Or watch The Midnight Gospel on Netflix.
Yes. Oh, yes. Watch The Midnight Gospel on Netflix. It's so brilliant. Crazy concept for a show, and it is brilliant to binge. Thank you, Duncan. You are the man. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll see you, man.